what is the cloud? And my initial response is, who cares? But we have a lot of people, a lot of vendors, a lot of service providers, a lot of consultants try to push what their definition is, either to make it sound creepier, bigger, faster, stronger, older, whatever. The bottom line is that it's a resource, just like all other computer and IT stuff is that's not at your desk. Okay? It's accessible through the internet, and it's not located at a site owned by you in terms of this conversation and whatever else they're telling you. Okay? So we're being very loose on that on purpose. And as far as the cloud goes, we're not going to go into the whole, Al Gore and all that kind of thing. Really, we've been using the cloud for a long time. Websites, where are they? Mostly in the cloud. They're at a third-party resource of the like. Individual emails hosted by a third party, Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, CompuServe, if we really want to date ourselves. Some of us just did. Then we started doing things more than just these couple of services. Now we started adding organizational email. And organizational email is different from the original Gmail, the original Yahoo Mail, all that kind of fun stuff, because now we actually can manage aspects of our organization through a portal, but it's all still up in the cloud. That would be your Office 365, the Google Docs, Google Apps. We then have commodity level applications and services. Okay, these are things where you sign up for someone who's providing a service for you or your organization. That service is pretty much provided by them off-site, cloud-based, so on and so forth. And then we've got backup, data recovery, storage, stuff that's stored by a third party. So we've had these things that have been creeping up. And how many of you, well, first of all, how many of you are either IT or management for a company? Okay, cool. The odds are your organization's already using one of these. We've gone well past the 50% level. As far as companies, I think we're now into about 65, 70% of companies right now are using some form of hosted cloud services. They may not have recognized it as such, but it's there. Okay. So, full disclosure, we're a silver level Microsoft partner. A lot of our resources, and by resources I mean Steve, we've been doing a lot of work developing our Azure understanding, which is Microsoft's offering as far as cloud servers. So when we talk about what we're doing or some of these options and some of these opportunities, we're going to talk about it strictly in Azure. However, there are other companies who are offering their own version of this. Amazon is the one that's most commonly mentioned in the same breath as Microsoft Azure. Google, as Bran is saying, they have some really aggressive, in a different way, but they have very, very aggressive cloud services. Rackspace, we're also a Rackspace partner. They have some of the same services. And then there's companies like HP and Dell who are starting to put together, or at least formulating there. So from a conceptual standpoint, we may look like we're talking about specifically Microsoft, but we're really talking about a lot of vendors out there. You also have other vendors who are there that are much smaller and local. So, for example, we have a client who actually lost they pretty much went out of business, but they still had a server and still had a need for people to access the server. So what we did was we found a cloud host that would literally physically take the server. So there is a physical box, and we are renting that, so that server is in the cloud technically. Now, the big guys aren't going to do that. The small guys have that flexibility. They were willing to do that, and they're obviously getting paid for it. So you have these smaller players that are out there as well. The nice thing about them, they're extremely flexible. These guys aren't so flexible for those kind of situations, but they've got some flexibilities of their own, if that makes sense. So now we're entering into a new phase. And really, to a degree, this new phase is if you could do it here, you can do it there. And that ends our presentation today. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. But that really is what's going on here. Is essentially if you are employing servers at your location, and those servers are being given the configuration, the horsepower, the software, whatever, in order to perform tasks, they can be done in the cloud. And they can be done virtually, and you can even not have a server and just have the application, so that technically you don't have a server out there. And we'll get into that a little bit. Okay? So we have infrastructure as a service. I want servers out there. Okay, but it's just like the server I have here, except it's out there. And we'll talk about the difference between them. And it really comes down to plumbing. Strangely enough, a lot of this, if you understand plumbing, you're going to understand cloud computing. The senator from Alaska, who is, it's all tubes, he was right. But you can also, because there are some flexibilities based on scale and the like, and we'll talk about this, you can also develop custom applications. So you can create applications that actually have benefits and some scalability because it's up in the cloud. And we'll talk about why that as well. And then package applications. The application's already there, you're just going to use it. Okay, so somebody's already written the application for you, you're going to use a piece of it. We're seeing more and more in the manufacturing world, more and more manufacturing companies that are starting to use cloud-based ERP solutions. Unthinkable 5 years ago. Totally unthinkable. But now, it's starting to make sense. And especially when you look at a manufacturing company, because a lot of those guys, and we love them, but a lot of those guys, their definition of obsolete was, does it turn on? If it turns on, it's not obsolete. So they're sitting there with this horribly out-of-date infrastructure, horribly out-of-date software, horribly out-of-date. Hey, we can just pay for this cloud service instead of having to upgrade necessarily everything. Simplifying there, but that's a great opportunity out there. And that way, the software as a service actually comes out pretty nice for them. So again, with a lot of companies, we do a lot of data backups. And a lot of our customers have backups to the cloud. So we've got that. You can actually go even further with some of the Azure and some of the other guys as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Deploy applications. You can actually deploy SQL database servers out there. And depending upon how your customers and vendors connect with you, or even your workforce, this could be really cool. Okay, and host websites, that's kind of boring. Depends on the website, and depends on what it's doing. If the website actually has a lot of application built in, so there's a lot of activity going on, you don't have to have those servers at your site. What do our servers do? When we have servers that are on site, what are the things? Remote desktop, which gets into the, do we need actual applications on the desktop? Remote desktop, web servers. We have a development environment where our developers develop. Traditional file server, media server. Okay, well, it's getting more and more important, right? Backups, authentication. Remember that one, that one's kind of cool. So what can the cloud server do? I animated that. It's whatever traditional server is doing. All of those can now be done as a cloud server or service. The server meaning you have a server that's actually, you're configuring it just as you're doing a local server here. Pretty cool because your skill set isn't wasted. You don't have to learn a whole new way. Or you just want the service, you don't want the server part of it. Cool, because now you have to manage less. You're just managing that resource that you want out there. Either way. Plumbing. And the reason that I bring this up, whenever we do anything, whenever we pull data that's not located on this device, we're pulling data across a network. That could be a local area network, it could be a wide area network, it could be the internet, it could be anything. But the issue is that we're pulling data. And when we take a look at an internal, so here's the scenario that I've got here. Down in the bottom left, that's the local office. That's your traditional, your office that has a server and workstations. And these workstations have to rely on getting programs and data from that local server. Okay? Cool. Then this company has customers or vendors that are located in their own offices, which have a similar network. But these guys, we want them to access information that's located potentially on this server in a traditional environment. Then we've got the person over at Starbucks working from home, working whatever. And we're going to ignore this one for right now. So what I want to show is this server has the data. And this data right here is transmitting between this guy and this guy at 1,000 megabits per second, 1 gigabit. What's a bit? It's a 1 or a 0. But the bottom line is it's up to 1,000 megabits per second. And I can have 50, I can have 100, I can have 1,000 devices, whatever, depending upon the size of this building. But the fact is that everybody who's going after this data is going after it at a very high speed. Okay? However, our internet connection, and I'm being very simplistic here, whether we have, and we talk about, wow, we got a T1, that's cool. Yeah! We got cable, that's a lot faster than a T1, yeah! We got fiber, that's really faster. But all of those are usually between 1 and 15 megabits per second. And that's one pipe. One pipe. Everybody gets, and I'm being very simplistic here, everybody gets their own pipe here. So you've got this data that's transmitting at approximately, at best, on a good day, 10% of the speed of here, and it's everybody trying to get to it. So if we have several customers and vendors, if we have a lot of people that are working offline or off-site, they're all contesting for this resource. This is the way we've done it. This is the way we've, now, and I don't want to get into the issue about VPN versus, because there's all sorts of tricks that can help this situation, but the bottom line, the baseline here is plumbing. So if we've got this, data on local server, that's terrific for lots of local traffic. I have lots of people accessing the resource here. Or I got a lousy internet connection. Okay? It's bad for lots of remote traffic, and it's also bad if you have a high reliance on these guys. If these people outside of your organization have a high need to access this data that's locally, then you're as good or as bad as this is. And keep in mind that in a lot of cases, your internet speed is your top internet speed. It's not what you get normally. And depending upon the contract you have with the provider, it's like if you have a T1 is a max of 1.5 megabits, okay? But you're pretty much going to get that speed, okay? With cable, with some of the other stuff, maybe kind of, sort of, sometimes you will. Depends. Plumbing scenario number 2 is the same thing, but let's put it here at a cloud service provider. Well, guess what? They've got a lot more bandwidth because that's what they do for a living. Okay? They can take a lot of people connecting. And we'll get into the resource that actually has the data. We'll get into that in a minute because that's an Achilles heel, as it is down here. So now, this is cool because whatever speed this guy's connecting to, that's pretty much the speed they're going to get here. They're not going to be slowed down by this. Similar with, no matter how many people I have connecting through this, it's going to be the same way because these folks are going to be one's from this home, one's from this restaurant, one's from, we're not telling where that one's from because it's kind of weird, whatever. Okay? Now, here's the, this is kind of good and kind of bad. It sort of depends. Because we don't have the vulnerability that these guys have. If these guys have a slow connection, then so would they, right? We don't have that. But we do have where suddenly these guys were enjoying a 1,000 megabits per second connection. Not so much now. So we've sacrificed the local folk to take care of these folks, which is absolutely fine as long as you take that into account. But I don't need this server anymore. I don't need to maintain the operation of this server anymore. So maybe I can use the savings here and bump that. So if I increase this speed, then more of these guys will be able to. Now, two things I haven't spoken about. I haven't spoken about, first of all, thick or thin, because if this is a thin application, meaning that it's pretty much web-based, there's not a whole lot of data that's actually going back and forth. The work's all being done up here, so the traffic isn't going to be that horrible, relatively speaking. So your mileage may vary, but your mileage is going to vary whether the server's here or the server's up here. Okay? And the strategy works either way, because it's a server. So, one other thing I want to make clear, whether this is a server or a service, there are still resources that we're going to allocate. Just like we have resource here, we have a traditional server. How much CPU power? How much memory? How much hard drive? How fast are the hard drives? All of that kind of stuff. And we have to, when we're purchasing these servers, we have to allocate that based on what we think the workload's going to be. Well, guess what? Same thing here. And in fact, that's how we're going to budget, by approximating how much resource we're going to need. But the nice thing is, this is virtual. These guys have, you see, they have 6 of these. So they have a lot. These guys only have 1 blue thing. Which looks like a high school locker room, but okay. Or locker front. But my point is that part of the job of the provider, Microsoft, Azure, Amazon, whomever, is to have a lot of server resource, and you can simply increase the amount of resource that you need, therefore increasing the cost that you're going to have. Or you look at it and you go, wow, we're really not doing that a lot, let's decrease it, in which case you're not paying for that anymore. So you really have options. Now, if you have a large enough organization, you may have the exact same option here. You may have bought enough server so that you're running a virtual environment here and you can reallocate resource. But it's still your purchase. You bought that. Does this make sense? So when you're looking at this, wow, what flexibility you have. And you're not buying anything, you're renting it. So you can rent. So let's talk about a company that's seasonal. If you have a company that is strictly seasonal, and let's say it's a sales, and they're doing retail, and they're very driven by holiday shopping, you could have it where they could ramp up. Okay, holiday shopping now starts August. Where they would ramp up, let's say, let's try to keep control on it, let's say after Labor Day, and they could actually ramp up based on scale, and then ramp down again mid-January. So their cost would go up, but so would their productivity, because they'd be able to handle the need. And then they'd be able to basically shut down a bit. They're still there. And by monitoring what they're doing and what the load is, wow, it turns out that, you know, somebody just posted a YouTube with their product and it's gone haywire, and let's ramp up the server again. Click, 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 commit, done. Can't do that here. Here's the third scenario. Let's put the data in both places. These folks can connect here, get the gigabit traffic going. These folks can connect here. And the only thing we need to make sure of is that the data that is applied here, and by data, it could be application data, it could be files, it could be users, it's credentials, it could be anything. Because remember, we listed all these things. We just need to make sure that the data here is replicated up to here. And the technology to do that is mature. It is there. So an organization can essentially, if they want to, their costs, because some of the savings we have here was based on this going away, and vice versa for that matter. But if we have an organization where it's critical to have the high performance we have here, and it's critical to have maximum performance that we can have here, we can do both. And it's not this insanely complex system. This is the hybrid. Okay? In my opinion, this is going to be more and more a default model for medium to larger companies. But the key is, forget the technology for a minute. The key is how much integration of business process and business information is there between this party, these parties, and these parties. Okay? That's the question. If your organization wants to make data and processes visible to your customers and to your vendors, then you're either going to look at a lot of investment here to allow that, or some investment here, but more on a monthly basis. And I'm simplifying, okay? Part of the challenge, though, I have this application that's running here. I want them to see it. Well, the application either has to be aware and able to handle this integration, so there may be some challenges along those lines, right? But it's worth a conversation. And, you know, companies that don't do those sort of things and can handle that kind of integration as far as their software and their offerings go, they're going to have problems moving forward. Because we want this. You know, if you took a look, you know, and take a look at, do a search on holiday expenditures on mobile devices per year. Okay? 4 years ago, zero. Nobody bought, not zero obviously, but very few people were buying stuff on the phone. They would shop, go home, and buy. Okay? Or they'd shop and go to their office and buy. You know. 3 years ago, people started doing it. 2 years ago, big time. Last year, this was responsible for most of the growth in terms of holiday spending. That is this. You have all of these people who are trying to do financial transactions. You have the whole BYOD, bring your own device, where people are trying to access company data. And if they're trying to access company data through their phones or through their devices, through their tablets, if they're not on site, they're this. Okay? Same thing for customers and vendors. When you take a look, you've probably all read the articles about Walmart and Walmart with their suppliers and how they are just take no prisoners in terms of the integration of Walmart's inventory and their supply chain. How does that happen? By integrating. Well, that's happening now with everybody. We all want our suppliers to be able to react as quickly as possible. We all want our customers to be as informed as possible so that they know what's going on. And the only way we can do that is by somehow streamlining the flow of data and the flow of applications. And that's not going away. Now, am I dealing with security here? Nah. Am I dealing with the actual application and the application needs? No. You know, because this is plumbing that we're talking about. So let's talk about desktop application. So right now, we have, and we used to call it terminal server, now we're supposed to call it remote desktop, where essentially we have a server that's really running all of the desktop applications. You know, but you have your end users, whether they be using dumb terminals or old PCs or whatever, they connect to that and have the full experience of the desktop app, but all of the horsepower is being done here. Take that out, put that up here, you've got the same thing. Any of you ever used, if you're a 365 and you have an E3 license, like, was it Office on Demand, is that it? If you use Office on Demand, you're using that. You can actually, if you go to somebody's computer and they don't have Office installed, well, first of all, shut it down now. If they don't have Office installed, you can actually log on to the portal and use Office on Demand, which will run Word, PowerPoint, Excel, whatever, on a remote desktop. And you'll be able to access your SharePoint and your OneDrive files and edit them and do whatever you want to. Okay? So what's happening now is down here, you could have the remote desktop be, it's a lot easier to maintain your desktops and the security and the similarities between all of the end users. Let's just take that up here. So now you could have people, no matter what they're connecting with, they get the desktop experience or just the application experience without having to install anything on their desktop. Now, what's the little Achilles heel on that? Internet connection. If they don't have internet connection, it's a bad experience. Well, it's a non-experience. It doesn't work. Okay? Because it's a remote desktop. If they can't connect to whether it be this service or this service, then they're left with whatever they have locally. Okay? Is that a serious issue or not? Well, that's up to you guys. So if, let's say, for example, that you're dealing with Salesforce, remote Salesforce, and the remote Salesforce goes on sites, you need to evaluate whether or not they're likely to have an internet connection when they're on those sites. If they're dealing a lot with manufacturing, the manufacturing goes on the shop floor and the shop floor has a lousy wireless or no wireless at all, they're not going to be able to connect. So you need, regardless of what the solution is, in which case, you need to take that into account when you're taking a look, when you're evaluating your options here. If this sounds, I don't want to use the word confusing. We've said this many times with our customers and potential customers. We live in a solution-rich environment. There are literally dozens of ways, dozens of vendors, dozens of offerings that give you the ability to have the data somehow skewed one way or the other, application security levels to allow, to disallow, to control, to whatever. And the big challenge is that you have to have a conversation between the technologist and between the business, and the technologist needs to tell you this is when it won't work. Okay? Because I don't care what the solution is, there are times when it won't work. And you have to say either A, that time is rare enough, okay, or that time is not valuable enough, or I'm not going to pay that amount of money to close that loophole. But you need to have that discussion. And part of the challenge is that as we add these solutions, and this is especially true when some people look at the free services, every one of these solutions has these Achilles heels. And we're not having enough honest, in my opinion, honest discussion that talks about what are the problems with them. And that starts here. I mean, if we simply say, well, let's just go back to that, well, this has its limitations as well. They all do. Now, let's do a couple. I'm going to add another factor into this, and that's file or folder synchronization. What that means, and we can do this here, we can do this here, is that there's actually a copy on my desktop of the files, whether they be here or they be here. I think I can show you an example. I have three favorites. I have OneDrive for business, I have SharePoint, and then we have our Anchor with synced folder. All three of these are synchronized. Apparently I have an error on one of those. But all three of these are synchronized folders that exist both on my laptop and in the cloud. If I open up the document,
is that similar to offline files?
yes. If I open the document, it actually opens here. There's no transfer anywhere. And when I save the file, once the file is saved, it then gets pushed up to the cloud. Now the nice thing about that is that works whether this is online or offline. And when someone here is doing this, when they have to open the file, there's no download. It's already there. We downloaded it earlier today when in the background when the user wasn't paying attention. So they are, as long as they're online, they are up to date. There's a lot of technologies. Dropbox does it, OneDrive does it, SharePoint does it, Anchor does it, all those kind of things, some better than others. We like, Anchor is the one we like because it has a lot of good security and monitoring and reports and the like. But that allows this person, these people to work online, to work offline, to have the files there. Doesn't work for every situation. Access databases would be one of them, because if you have multiple people accessing the database, one's working on this copy, one's working on this copy, so on and so forth. Okay. The third scenario, remote desktop. I've got a remote desktop server here. So what happens is this person kicks off Excel. Excel is actually run on this server here. The only data that's transmitted is the screen, what that person sees. And then when this person moves the mouse, types the keyboard, does all that activity, that's transferred up here. If the file is uploaded here as well, then the file is, there's no transmission that goes as far as the file goes, and when it's saved, there's no data or transmission that goes on there as well. But the person definitely has to be online for that one, or the remote server has to be located here. Any questions on this one? Colors are good. It's a typo. This is what you could do. Okay? These are the things that you can set up as far as a server goes. And the reason I show this is because we've got traditional storing. We've got actual applications, websites, services, mobile services, virtual machines, marketplaces and stores. Now we're starting to get into services that third parties are offering. Scheduling, SQL, all sorts of things. These are all things that you can now set up within this cloud-based infrastructure. And it's fairly simple if you already know how to work with servers. The new stuff, infrastructure, servers, just servers. You can remote desktop into them and manage them just like you would do local within your organization. They're servers. They run services. They have amount of disk space. They have processors. But they're running virtually, which means you can change the amount of resource that's assigned to them. So if you have a server that only has X amount of resources that's given to it, so much processor, so much memory, you can actually just bump the memory. Might require a reboot. That's it. Applications. It's where you can actually, I want an IIS server. So it handles websites and that. I don't really need the server, I just need IIS. So I'm actually just pay for the services, not for the server, so I can have my website. And take that all the way to applications. Similarly with SQL. Azure has just publicized within the last week, I think it was last week, they had some private SQL stuff that was available. But now it's pretty much you can run, if you've got a SQL server that your clients want to go after, or BI, you have BI needs for customers, all that kind of thing, you can now start putting that stuff in the cloud very easily. And by the way, when I say very easily, this is an IT project. Okay, so there needs to be IT skills that are doing it, but a lot of the current IT skills that an IT professional who's kept up to date with like Server 2012, 2012 R2 and the like, it's not a huge learning curve, relatively speaking. And then managing identity and access. Actually, Steve, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
The question that I have is do most of these companies that offer these services, do they have some sort of internet interruption sort of hiccups?
Anyway. Every cloud service fails.
Right.
Okay? I don't care who it is. I don't care. Over the last 12 months, every one of them, I don't know if that's the one to start with or not. It's pretty. Every one of them has had some kind of interruption, whether it be planned or unplanned. And quite honestly, I don't see that changing. So when you take a look at, and quite honestly, this is partially why I'm nervous about getting involved heavily with the smaller guys, because those are the ones that are going to cut their costs to try to compete, are going to, you know, all that kind of stuff. And some of them are run by my friends. That's great. That's wonderful. We'll stay friends. Not going to do it. When you take a look at these larger guys, there's absolutely a maturation process that's going on. You know, we've had, over the past year, we've had about 2 outages that I've seen with 365 that have been what I would consider sweeping, okay? There's been probably about half a dozen or so more where we've seen like a couple of services or a partial hiccup over the past year. I've also heard some of the same thing as far as Google goes, and I've seen some of the same thing as far as Amazon goes. I will say, and it's kind of like an ongoing debate between these two guys as to why, but over the past couple of months, some of the main ISPs have not been as reliable. Time Warner, Comcast had a similar issue where they were doing upgrades or whatever. Kevin thinks it's because of IPv6 updates. Steve thinks it's because of Vista. But the issue is and I do think that over the next year or so, there are a lot of these guys who are going to be upgrading some of their older infrastructure, because that's definitely seems to be part of the issue. And I think there are going to be some hiccups that happen all the way. Not always blamable on these guys.
Is that from the routers being overwhelmed, the external routers?
I think it was that.
It could be a lot of different things. It could be as simple as, you know, they're upgrading like base circuits, like core circuits.
Putting
switching stuff
updated
over and
firmware on your internal modem, and it knocks
Right.
it causes issues with the firewall.
somebody plugged something in the wrong spot.
Yeah, in the case of Comcast, which was about a month ago or so, that's the one that took level platforms down for a better part of a day. That was the older routers were basically crapped out. In the case of Time Warner, which was a couple weeks ago, we never really got a good answer on that one, except it was a maintenance issue. With that kind of maintenance, so.
Someone plugged something in the wrong
Yeah.
place.
Yep. So, but I want to talk a little bit about the identity and access management, because this is one of the few things, I've been using that analogy for that whatever your server did, the cloud server can do. And it's just a little bit different as to where this stuff is. This is one where it's actually a bit more than that. And I'm going to now use the same level of knowledge that I have with Minecraft. So if you want to.
Well, and it looks really, really complex. You know, all the stuff everywhere. But essentially, you know, those of you who have Office 365, you know, typically your password starts out as a different password than your internal password. Well, this kind of takes care of that issue. Starting with just like a same sign-on, so you log onto your computer in the office with the same password you log in to Office 365 with. You know, the password is just set inside your company, so it's set with the same password, and it synchronizes up to Office 365. You know that when you open SharePoint or you open Outlook web access, it still prompts you for a password. It's just the same one, which is kind of convenient because we all have way too many passwords to remember. And this actually, because it's Microsoft, it's kind of built into the back end of Office 365 already. So it also, taken a step further, you can actually do single sign-on where you open Outlook web access, you open SharePoint, a number of other applications actually, but from the core, basically you open those websites and it automatically logs you in because it's with the same credentials. You're logged onto your machine at work. As long as you're logged in correctly there, it then logs you automatically into those other services.
Which are not necessarily Microsoft services.
Right.
Right, so for example, you've got Salesforce here. So you could be set up in such a way that your Active Directory credentials are going to help get you into Salesforce. And the nice thing on this is, from a corporate IT standpoint, that means you don't have to necessarily tell your end user what their Salesforce credentials are. It's going to be built in, so they don't need to even know it. It's built into Active Directory, which, when you consider it from all of the systems that you've got going necessarily, and some of these, you got FedEx, you got Salesforce, all of these, you have, not only do you have corporate passwords as far as what's the top level, but then each individual user has these passwords and these accounts. And if that user leaves, you then have this whole issue of, I have to go and reset every one of the accounts that we think that person has. By doing this kind of identity integration with, again, we're talking with Azure on this standpoint, now the whole idea of all of these, number one, from the end user standpoint, all of these passwords that person has to memorize, the list just got smaller, but also all of the passwords that you as corporate have to tell these people and then manage and maintain for them, that just went away. One-stop shopping.
On that, and interesting point, it works in two ways. It's first, from the Salesforce perspective, you assign that user their own account for that service. Or from the perspective of, let's say, even like Facebook or Twitter, if you have a company Twitter account that you have 5 of the salespeople, post to, you don't really want them to have that user and password. You can assign that user and password to any number of people, the same one for this group. So you then, they open up Facebook and it automatically logs them in as long as they're logged onto their laptop. So when and if they leave, you just change their one password or disable their one account, and they no longer have access to any of those services.
Or if they lose their laptop.
Nobody does that.
No.
Nobody checks their laptop in the luggage on an airplane.
Well, and from the Apple perspective, actually, you can actually set up multi-factor authentication with Azure. So you can set it up so that if they're not inside the building, then you type in the password and it buzzes their cell phone. And you have to type in the code. So it does the multi-factor thing too.
So this actually gives you a reasonably simple method of adding a complete layer of security to all of the applications your employees are using, and make it easier for them to do it.
I was wondering how he's handling it, because you got this one password, so if the bad guy gets it, they got the keys to your city. If it's single sign-on.
Well, yes, which they would have. If the person memorized the passwords on their profile, they're going to have it even then. Or if the person has the Post-it note or the notes document or anything along those lines. No, nobody does that.
You put it underneath the keyboard.
There you go.
Well, and
That's checked into luggage.
That's also where the multi-factor comes in too. Just like
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
a good point.
a lot of VPNs for like employees at banks. They carry a little RSA secure ID on their keychain, and you have to type in your password, and you have to type in that little code.
Well, that's what I was happy to hear about.
Yeah, and that's set up right out of the box. And I say out of the box, but it's not a 5-minute process to set up. But once it is set up, it flows very nicely.
Yeah. Again, I want to stress here that this is not something, hey, I'm just going to go add some servers in Azure or Amazon or anybody and add these. It's a project. It's an implementation project, and you need to have a certain level of skill set, a certain level of IT pro skill set. I don't know, like, okay, Steve, in order to take advantage of it. So, cool.
And the password sync, that part's not so complex, and it's actually included as part of Office 365. So it's not like an extra cost add-on piece in Azure that back-end Azure piece, like I said earlier, because it's built on the back end already, that you can enable that as part of your service just with your subscription.
Cool.
Cool, thanks. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. Yeah, because I keep talking. So we, yes. Here's the bottom line, is really the question that comes up in my mind as far as this whole issue of cloud-based servers and all of that kind of fun stuff. It is about where you are in terms of this concept, in terms of your organization and how dispersed is your workforce, how dispersed or how in communication do you want to be with your customers and vendors. Then you start taking a look at these opportunities. In addition to that, you absolutely should be taking a look at it as far as business continuity, disaster recovery, but not so much of whether or not this is the best solution for you, but you should be looking at your business continuity and disaster recovery. Okay, there's so many options out there and they're not that expensive, relatively speaking. So is this mature so it's up, 99.99999 times, but no, it isn't, but it's getting there. And it is such that you can actually expend a lot more money to add more nines to the end if you want to. So one of the things that we're adding is if you'd like to talk to us about how well this fits for your organization. You know us, we don't arm twist, but how this works, whether or not it's appropriate, in line with what we've discussed. Happy to do that, free, but contact John, and he can arrange that.
Thank you, Bob.
And that's it. Yay.